How do I accept anxiety? This week on The Anxious Truth, we're continuing our little mini series on how to accept anxiety by looking at the need to open up to other options when you're triggered. So let's get at it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Anxious Truth. This is episode 310 of the podcast. We are recording in January of 2025. I am Drew Linsalata. I am a therapist practicing pre-licensed under supervision as of January 2025, specializing in the area of anxiety and anxiety disorders. I am a 3-time author on this topic, a podcaster, an advocate, a psychoeducator, and a former sufferer for many years of my life on and off, but thankfully doing better now. Thank you very much. And today on The Anxious Truth, we're going to talk about the idea that we need to be able to open up to other options before we can actually say that we are accepting anxiety. So of course, if this is your first time here listening to The Anxious Truth as a podcast or watching as a YouTube video, then welcome. I hope you find what you get here useful today and applicable in your own anxiety recovery journey. And of course, if you are a returning listener, then welcome back. I appreciate you spending your time with me every 2 weeks as always. So let us get back to it. How do I accept anxiety? What are the steps? This is what we started talking about last week on episode 309 of the podcast. What are the steps to accept anxiety? Because while you might want to adopt acceptance or surrender or willful tolerance or floating, you might not really even understand what that looks like. And you cannot even imagine how you can accept the thing that you really hate, and you're looking for steps. And if you haven't listened to episode 309 of the podcast, which we did 2 weeks ago, you should go check that out because it lays the foundation for this one. So here's the thing. There are, in fact, no steps, but there is a framework. And like I said in the last episode, for this little series, we're using the ACT Triflex, which has been made famous by Dr. Russ Harris. He's an Australian physician who does a lot of work in acceptance and commitment therapy. Russ is awesome. He's really friendly. He has a really easy to access delivery about him. And he talks about the ACT Triflex. He simplified this. That does in fact have steps, 3 steps, but they're still not kind of steps. The first step that we talked about last week on episode 309 is to get present. And today we're looking at sort of the second rung of the ACT Triflex ladder, or the second point in the ACT Triflex, and that would be opening up. In episode 311, in 2 weeks, we'll talk about the final bit of sort of instructions, which is doing what matters based on our values, rather than blindly following fear. So the ACT Triflex tells us that part of acceptance is get present, which we talked about 2 weeks ago, open up, which we're going to talk about today, and do what matters, which we're going to talk about in 2 more weeks. This is how we accept, surrender to, and willfully tolerate anxiety and panic and scary thoughts, etc., etc. So today we're going to examine what it means to open up. And that means to at least consider that there might be other options in front of you, even when triggered and feeling anxious or afraid. Accepting, surrendering, floating through, tolerating, or otherwise not fighting or resisting anxiety, a thing that you absolutely hate or even fear, is really about challenging the belief that it totally controls you and makes you react by running or fleeing or begging to be saved or avoiding anything that might actually trigger you. We challenge that belief. Then we put that challenge into action by interrupting what might feel like an automatic sequence that you will say you have no say in. So when people like Russ Harris or Stephen Hayes, or I, if I may be so bold as to put myself in their company, say that part of accepting is to open up, to look at other options, you might want to react by saying that is impossible. You must go to the emergency room if you panic, or you must never be left alone, or you must argue against your scary thoughts until you're absolutely exhausted. These are automatic things that you have no choice in. And remember that everyone gets to go in the direction that they think is best for them. So while from a clinical perspective, I might say that this belief is misguided or even wrong, if you are sort of dug in here deeply and you insist that you have zero say in the matter when triggered, but also want to know what the steps are to accept and overcome anxiety, you may wind up frustrated by this topic. And oddly, in a very meta way, before you can open up, kind of have to open up. That is, open up to the possibility that your belief about having no say could potentially be wrong. But before we can put our second principle into action, before you can stop and look at your options when triggered, you have to be able to see the machine working, which we talked about in episode 309. We have to be able to recognize that we've been triggered and watch our knee-jerk resistance instantly kick in and rise in intensity. That's why we don't start with don't run, which is an act of opening up to another option, of course, but we start with the first principle of getting present from episode 309 2 weeks ago. And surprise, that is in fact a mindfulness construct. Now, virtually all third or fourth wave treatments, and yes, there are people talking about a fourth wave now based on values and compassions, every one of those treatments have a strong element of mindfulness in them. So we don't really get to talk about acceptance, which is also part of the third wave, without automatically dragging mindfulness into the picture. And wouldn't you know it, if in fact you are frustrated or confused by the idea of mindfulness or acceptance, I am working on a practical mindfulness skills group that runs for 6 weeks with a very small group of participants at a very low cost. It's geared specifically for anxiety recovery. This is 6 weeks of practical mindfulness where we meet weekly, we practice mindfulness skills together, talk about the experience, we have a little bit of lecture, and we work on practicing every day to build our awareness and ultimately our choice. Part of opening up is first build the awareness. And I've created a free introductory guided mindfulness practice that you can download to see if this strikes a chord with you. So feel free to go check out learn.theanxioustruth.com, grab it, download it, and see if it works for you. You are certainly welcome to it. So if you are working on your mindful awareness and you're watching that escape and avoidance machine working rather than automatically and blindly jumping in to let it take you for a ride, then logically in the acceptance chain, if we are working on not fighting or resisting, then we ultimately wind up asking, okay, so then what do I do instead of resisting? And that is in fact an excellent question. This is where we look at opening up to other options. If you have been sure for a very long time that running or being saved or fighting or escaping is your only option when anxious or afraid, then you almost have to ask this question, right? What do I do now? I'm in a triggered state. The machine is cranking away here and it wants me to follow it like I always do. But what else might I do here? The answer to that question is actually going to change. It's going to change from moment to moment, situation to situation. It's going to vary for a very wide degree. But generally speaking, we're going to address it through the lens of values, what is important to us in episode 311 of the podcast in a couple of weeks. But for now, I want you to stay focused and mindful, if you will, pardon the pun, of the actual moment where you stop and pause and consider that you may actually have another way forward. And all I really want you to consider today is that you don't have to be able to identify that other way or all those other options right this second. You really only have to engage in the act of opening up. Metaphorically, if we try and describe what that might look like, it might look like that silly John Travolta Pulp Fiction meme where he's sort of wandering around. He's walking back and forth. He's super confused. That's the Vinny Vega character from Pulp Fiction. It's okay. So I won't pick the old option, but I'm not really sure what new option to pick either. And guess what? If you can find yourself in that position, actually wondering what to do next, then you are in fact winning. You're not resisting automatically. You're in the moment of choice. You can only get to the moment of choice when you get present and find the courage to watch that machine, the fear machine, rather than to jump into it and ride it into avoidance like you've always done. And I know that this is like super micro, and it is at some level, but if you were my therapy client and you were consistently looking like the John Travolta Vinny Vega character, sort of wondering where to go next, even when anxious and afraid and really uncomfortable and in a state of distress, I would give you a huge fist bump, because just getting there means that you are no longer reacting in a knee-jerk way to your scary thoughts or powerful emotions or physical anxiety symptoms. So we might want to stop for a second, forgive the mindfulness reference, take a moment to appreciate the moment, shall we? Like you're in the middle of what feels like a raging storm and you are actually asking yourself what to do next. It's not automatic. You're actually asking what to do next. I mean, that's a big deal. Let it sink in. I mean, it's a really big deal. So this sort of brings us back to that sort of psychological flexibility thing that if you hang around here long enough or you work with me in therapy, you get really tired of hearing me talk about. But in my view, this issue, recovery, is largely based on developing increased psychological flexibility. That might be a very set of sort of rigid rules and beliefs and standards that you start with. And those things drive a very highly avoidant approach to anxiety, and it creates a life that you hate. Over time in recovery, slowly that gives way to flexibility. Flexibility, the way we define it, is the ability to be with your experiences, even the really difficult ones, without automatically running from them or pushing back against them. And really, if we want to get a little bit philosophical here, even anxious moments are your moments, and you are in fact entitled to them. So building psychological flexibility is a great way to sort of take your moments back. And as humans, unfortunately, we have a finite number of them allocated to us in our lifetime. So this is a way to access all of them, good and bad alike. Like just reacting blindly, automatically, and saying you have no choice gives away a lot of those moments, and we don't get an unlimited number of them. So opening up our topic today, the second part of that ACT Triflex, the acceptance framework, it's 100% an act of being less rigid and more psychologically and behaviorally flexible. And by the way, the psychological flexibility, in my opinion and my experience, is actually harder than the behavioral in most cases. So don't be angry and impatient with yourself when you're acting in new ways, but your mind is still insisting that it has to stay in the old ways. Like patience, please, just chill out. Your protective bits sort of need time to really get with that program through repetition. So this is opening up. First, get present. That was episode 309. Watch the machine rather than automatically engaging in evaluation and assessment and judgment and prediction and resistance. And if you're not going to do what you usually do, because you're getting good at getting present and observing your experiences, then you have to find an alternate path, which means you open up and start to consider what can come next. And yes, this all happens really quickly because brains are fast. But even though things might only take a second or two to play out, that is both a short amount of time and a very long amount of time for a computer as powerful as this thing between our ears. Do not discount the tiny slices of time. The path to recovery is really just stitching those together. So next time on episode 311, which will come out in 2 weeks, we will look at the last third of the ACT Triflex, and that is do what matters. That's the discussion of values that inform our actions rather than fear calling the shots automatically. And I find that discussion super interesting and helpful in this process. So don't forget to come back for that again in about 2 weeks. And also don't forget to check out my website, which is theanxioustruth.com, because as I am very fond of saying, The Anxious Truth is more than just this podcast episode or this YouTube video. There's a ton of other resources there, most of which are free. Even the ones that carry a cost or at a very low or reasonable cost. I'm not $6,000 mastermind guy, and I'm never going to be. So check it out at theanxioustruth.com. Certainly avail yourself of all the resources. And yeah, people tell me it's useful. So go check it out. And in the end, that is episode, what did I say this was? 310 of The Anxious Truth in the books. I'm not doing music this week, or maybe I will. I'll put it in editing. I don't know. So I will wrap it up as I always do with asking you a few favors. One of which is if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or some platform that lets you rate and review the podcast, maybe leave a 5-star rating if you really dig the podcast. And if you really, really like the podcast, take a moment and write a quick review to tell people why, because it helps more people find the podcast and then more people get the help that they're looking for. And that's really why I started doing this to begin with anyway. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, maybe subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when I upload new content, like the video, leave a comment. I am starting to get back in finally to checking out comments and answering the ones that I can. And then I will just remind you that we're talking about how to accept anxiety, which is a pretty big order. I totally get that. It is not easy to do. It's going to take some time. But if you can work on these first 2 steps, getting present, opening up, at least consider that there might be another way to do this. If you can turn toward that today, just a little bit more than you have been turned toward your fear forever long, then you are winning. These steps count. Open up, let the experiences teach us things, challenge those rigid beliefs that are so closely held about being unsafe because you feel unsafe. That will all add up. It will all start to matter over time. Keep going, even if the steps are little. Anyway, that is it, guys. I will be back in another 2 weeks with episode 311, where we will finish this 3-part miniseries by talking about doing what matters as the third part of acceptance in the ACT Triflex. Thanks for hanging around today. I hope you found it useful. We are out. I will see you in 2 weeks.